In the last video, we talked about the 3 questions that you need to ask yourself when using PredictWind, how to set it up properly, and how to choose a departure window you can live with. This video is where it all comes together. In about 15 minutes, I want to give you the tools you need to actually interpret what this program is showing you. We're going to talk about where the data comes from, what the models actually are, and how to read the routing output. And most importantly, how to combine weather routing with real navigation so you don't set your crew up for failure. Before we talk about models, routes, or any of this output, it helps to understand one thing. PredictWind is not inventing weather. All of this starts with raw observations, data coming from thousands of sources around the world, weather buoys, satellites, aircraft, weather balloons, land-based stations. That raw data gets fed into the big weather models where the physics gets solved and a forecast is generated. Once that forecast is produced, it's packaged into something called a GRIB file. GRIB stands for gridded binary. It's a standardized way of distributing huge amounts of forecast data, wind, pressure, waves, currents, temperature, all in one compact file, updated multiple times a day. PredictWind takes GRIB data from multiple model centers, processes it, feeds it into its own routing algorithms, and then presents it in a way that humans can actually make decisions with. What you see as this beautiful dance of swirling color actually looks like this. This is a GRIB file, and this is what sailors used to work with even just 7 or 8 years ago. Before GRIBs, it looked even more primitive. We used to get synoptic charts over HF radio. Ever heard of weather facts? These were big picture weather maps drawn by meteorologists and sent out over the air. You'd wait for the chart to scroll out line by line, then interpret it by hand. And those charts were a human interpretation of the models, the pressure systems and fronts and isobars, all in one picture. GRIBs changed that. Instead of just seeing the conclusion, we started working directly with the model itself. PredictWind is the evolution of that whole process. It takes the same underlying data, runs it through modern models and routing algorithms, and gives you a way to interact with it rather than just look at it. The goal hasn't changed. We're still trying to understand patterns and make good decisions. We just have better access now. So when you're looking at routes and graphs and tables, remember this. It's not perfect. Don't freak out if it's off a little bit. This is interpreted forecast data, not a promise. So let's talk about the weather models themselves. You'll see names like ECMWF, that stands for European Center for Medium Range Weather Forecasts. It's an independent European weather organization. It's not the EU itself, and it generally is known for being very consistent. Then there's GFS, that's the US Global Forecast System, which updates frequently and gives you a good sense of how fast things might be changing. UKMO is the global model run by the UK Met Office. ICON is a German model, and it can be particularly strong in certain regions. You'll also see AIFS, which is the newer AI-assisted forecasting model. And on top of that, PredictWind runs its own models, PWG, PWE, and PWAI, which add higher resolution detail and additional perspective. Each one of these is a different computer simulation of the same atmosphere. They all start with slightly different data. They use slightly different assumptions, and they prioritize slightly different things. With the exception of PWE and PWG, those are the same algorithm, but one uses the data set from the US and one uses the data set from Europe. There is no correct model. There are only opinions with track records. And PredictWind doesn't force you to pick one. It lets you compare them side by side and judge confidence. And if you haven't gotten this yet, that comparison is the entire point. One of the most powerful features in PredictWind is validation. Validation simply asks, which models have been performing well recently in this area? Past performance doesn't guarantee the future, but it absolutely will tell you which opinions have been worth listening to lately. This becomes incredibly important when models disagree, or timing is critical, or conditions are marginal. Validation doesn't decide for you, but it's just one more piece of data for you to turn into judgment. Before we talk about how to interpret a route, let's quickly talk about how to actually set one up, because this part is intentionally simple. Just like departure planning, you start by telling PredictWind two things: your point of origin and your destination. First, you put the green point on your boat, right where you're at now. Then you put the red point on your destination. In the top right corner, you tap the clock icon and you choose your departure time. And when you're ready, tap the blue arrow to download the routes. That's it. PredictWind takes your boat polars, your settings, and the weather models you've selected and generates a route for each model. And what you get back is a clean, colorful, graphical representation of the nominal course your boat would sail for each weather model. And this is where a lot of people stop. The map looks great, the lines look smooth, everything feels reassuring, but this isn't enough information really to make a decision. The map shows you where the boat goes, but not how it's going to feel, and not what's happening over time. That's why we don't start with the map. We start with graphs. Graphs show timing, not just magnitude. You can switch between wind, combined wave, wind wave, primary swell, secondary swell, tertiary swell. This is huge. A secondary swell from a storm 1,000 miles away can ruin a passage, even if the wind looks fine. Graphs let you see when things peak and how fast they build and how quickly they ease. And it's very easy to see when the weather models diverge and don't agree with each other. Once I understand the shape of the weather, I move on to the summary table. This is where PredictWind really shines. Here you can compare routes across models side by side. Some rows matter more than others offshore: wave height distribution, roll, vertical acceleration, comfort metrics. I'm not trying to optimize speed. I'm trying to decide which option lets my crew function. I'm not going to go through every one of these, as most of them are pretty self-explanatory, but let me call out one line specifically: vertical acceleration. We talked about this in the first video, but it bears repeating. This is a measure of how violently the boat is moving up and down, and it's one of the best predictors of fatigue, seasickness, broken gear, and bad decisions. Two routes can have similar wind and wave heights and feel completely different. You can also see this on the waves graph, but we're going to go very deep into that in video number 3. Okay, what I'm going to talk about now may be the most important section of this entire series. Weather routing does not replace navigation. Before I ever trust a route, I zoom way in. I'm looking for headlands, shoals, reef systems, traffic choke points, wind acceleration zones. I do this in PredictWind and in my navigational software. Then, and this is critical, I add exclusion zones. If there's an area I don't want the routing to consider, I tell the software to route around it. This sounds simple, but this is what caused the USS San Francisco submarine to hit an underwater mountain at flank speed and almost lose the boat. If they had just zoomed in, they would have seen it. Your job as captain is to integrate weather routing, navigation, and crew limits. PredictWind gives you the tools, but you make the calls. And in my opinion, it's always better to draw your exclusion zones in both your routing software and your navigation software. Because people do funny things when they're tired and navigate from the weather software. They both have lines and they both have little boats on them. Now, before I trust any of these routes, there's one more layer I always check. PredictWind integrates GMDSS warnings, and I want to pause for a second and explain what that actually means. GMDSS stands for Global Maritime Distress and Safety System. It's the official, internationally coordinated system used by marine authorities to broadcast safety information to ships at sea. This system has been around since the early 1990s, and if you've ever seen the raw output, it used to look like this. Just massive blocks of text. You'd have to sift through all of this to find the one line that mattered to you on your route, but now PredictWind overlays that same authoritative information directly on the map. So when you're reviewing a route, you can immediately see if it intersects a warning area. These are things like gale and storm warnings, tropical disturbances and cyclones, navigation warnings, restricted or dangerous zones. If your route crosses a warning zone, that's not a suggestion. That's a signal to stop and think. You'll notice I'm not spending a lot of time on sail crossover logic. Offshore, we reef and shake reefs constantly, sometimes daily. I care more about crew survivability, fatigue management, and margin. If you're racing, these tools matter. It'll tell you when to change sails. But for offshore sailing, it doesn't really apply. One last thing. Departure planning and routing aren't just pre-departure tools. I rerun them offshore all the time to sanity check changes and see how patterns are evolving and confirm that my margins are still valid. Good seamanship is continuous decision making. That's how I use PredictWind routing in the real world, not to chase the perfect line, but to understand risk, comfort, and timing. In the next video, we're going to go even deeper into validation and trust and how to monitor offshore conditions to keep it as comfortable as possible. I'll see you there.